Welcome back to the History Fix. Today we're going to talk about the origins of the state, which sort of follows on from things that we've talked about in previous episodes. The agricultural revolution, the emergence of a social surplus, the way in which that gives rise to specialist roles and a division between men and women and a division between the mass of ordinary people who are doing the work and specialists like priests and warriors. And we talked about how this gives rise to the oppression of women as men increasingly are in control of property because they're the ones doing the ploughing and looking after the herds, and the way in which it gives rise to exploitation of classes because people like the priests and the warriors and the kings, the tribal rulers, they use their position to accumulate surplus and increasingly have the ordinary folk under the cosh. Now, another aspect of this is the emergence of the state, which is partly to do with the fact that there is a surplus available to construct a state, but it's also because some of these other changes give rise to the need for a state, because there's a build-up now of social tensions between the rich and the poor, the haves and the have-nots, the powerful and the less powerful, and also tensions between different groups of rulers who control different territories, and they are competing with each other. So you've got a division of the world in different ways, giving rise to tensions and the need for a state. But let me try and define what I mean by a state. Because when we think of the state, we know the state does many different things. If I just think for a moment about ancient states, I'm aware, for example, of states which are organizing irrigation systems like the Egyptian state, or a postal system like the Persian Empire, or a tax collection system like the Roman Empire, and so on. But when I think about the state, I think the real core of it is that it consists of armed bodies of men, and occasionally, but not so often, women as well, armed bodies of men who act as a coercive force, controlled by the ruling class, controlled by the people at the top of society, and really being used in two directions. On the one hand, being used to keep the ordinary folk who are doing the work inside the society under firm control, and in the other, directing that coercive power against rivals who control other territories, other tribes, other states, other empires. Now, both of those forms of coercion are important for the state, but I'm going to come back to the first of them in later episodes, and this time focus on that second role of building a state and using that state to control your territory, to control your resources, and to compete with other ruling classes. And that process is very competitive indeed. And I think we can see the state, the ancient state, as it emerges, being used in a process of what I shall describe. I'm going to use a technical term. I'm going to describe it as a process of politico-military competition, where there are different states, different political entities, which are rubbing up against each other, which are in conflict with each other, and they're using military power, both to protect themselves, but also to project their own power and take over other territory. And what makes it so tense, of course, is that any of these early states that tries to stand still is liable to find itself overwhelmed by other states which are more expansionist, more aggressive, which are building their power more quickly and more effectively. And so I think what we see very early after the agricultural revolution and the first development of a surplus and the emergence of classes and the oppression of women, all of these things, we see some of these states becoming very powerful, gobbling up territory, gobbling up smaller political entities to create the first empires. And we can see it, if we go back about 5,000 years, so we're talking about around about 3000 BC, I think we can see emerging for the first time in some parts of the world. This is still the early Bronze Age we're talking about, but I think we can see emerging for the first time entities, political entities, states that we can now call empires. 4 places in particular where this seems to be happening. In Mesopotamia, today's Iraq, the land of the 2 rivers, in Egypt, in the river valley of the Nile, in the Indus Valley, in what is now Pakistan, and in the Yellow River Valley of China. In these 4 different places, we seem to be seeing powerful states, empires emerging about 5,000 years ago, driven by this process of politico-military competition between rival elites. And what we see these states doing is using their military power to accumulate territory, to accumulate control over land and labour and the resources generated, to be accumulating tribute, and also to be turning war captives into slaves. So this process of state building is also very much bound up with the origins of slavery. We are facing the greatest crisis in the history of humanity. Capitalism is driving us towards climate catastrophe. To understand how we got here and how we get out of it, we really need to understand human history. What we're trying to do here at the History Fix is to give us the understanding of the past that we need to equip us to fight for a better future. If you like what we're doing, please share and subscribe, and also contribute to our Patreon page. Thanks very much.